Hey guys, it's so great to be back with you for another week of Vital Sunday. Before I get stuck into this week's talk, I'm going to bring you this week's challenge. So this week's challenge is the toilet roll challenge. So basically all we want to see is how many keepy uppies you can do with the toilet roll. To be in with a chance of winning points for your life group, all you have to do is send us a video of you doing it so we have proof of how many you've done. And here is a very rubbish attempt of me doing it. As you're probably aware, over the past number of weeks, we have been going through lots of different disciplines, which are basically just rhythms that we can create into our everyday that ultimately will bring us closer to God. And so I am finishing up the series this week with the discipline of worship. And so what is worship? Is worship just the words that we sing or the way that we sing them? Or is worship so much more than that? And firstly, I want to say that worship is how we show and express our love for God. In Psalm 63, verse 3 and 4, it says this: "Because your love is better than life, my lips will glorify you. I will praise you as long as I live." And so we can worship in lots of different ways. We can sing, we can jump, we can dance, we can wave flags, we can raise our hands. And they're just some of the ways that we can do that. Basically just to express our love for God. I love the analogy of the sports team. So say you support the Irish rugby team and you're down at the Aviva Stadium and one of the Irish players is sprinting towards their opponent's try line and they score a try. Well, your first initial reaction would not be to stand there in the stands and say, "Oh, suppose that was very good." No, your reaction would be to jump up and down, to scream, to shout, like you would go absolutely mad because you follow that team and you're supporting them and you're like so excited that they have just scored a try. In the same way, we support and follow Jesus, and so we do these things as well to show and express our love for him. Secondly, worship is glorifying and honouring God in all we do. I love Romans 12 verse 1. It's probably one of my life mantras, but it says this: "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." And I'm going to read the Message version as well because I think it just puts it so great of how we can actually do that practically. So it says, "Here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering." And so, through this verse, Paul is saying that actually the way that we live our lives is a way in which we can worship God. He is saying that as Christians, we should live in a way that is pleasing to God. And so that might look slightly different than the people around us. And so a way for us to do that might be to help others, to be people who create peace, and actually be people who speak well of others, that we're always building each other up rather than tearing people down. Another thing that Paul is saying is that worship isn't simply about singing. It's actually an attitude. And so we need to create this discipline in our lives to continuously choose to worship God in our everyday, to choose whether we want to walk towards him rather than away from him. Also, it means that actually we have a chance to honour and dishonour God in every decision that we make, whether it's big or small. Actually, the discipline of worship is about choosing the right path, and in doing so, that we're glorifying God through it. And so, as you probably know, that sin are the things that we do and think and say which ultimately send us in the opposite direction from God. And so, worship is about living in the ways of God, doing the things that actually bring us closer to him. And another thing, God draws us to himself. He is constantly calling us to worship. And actually, that's what we were created for. And so in every moment, we have an opportunity to worship God. We have an opportunity to choose that what we do either glorifies him or doesn't. I totally love the story in the Bible of Mary anointing Jesus' feet. And so we're told that she takes a 12-ounce jar of really expensive perfume and uses it to anoint Jesus' feet. And in fact, this perfume wasn't cheap. It wasn't as if Mary could go down to the pound shop and get a bottle of perfume for a couple of pound. But actually, we're told that this perfume was actually worth a year's wages. And so you might think that that's a bit of a waste. Like Judas in the story, he thinks that Mary has totally wasted the money, wasted the perfume, and actually that could have went towards the poor. But actually, it meant so much more for Mary than that. For Mary, it meant taking possibly one of the most expensive things that she owned and offering it as an act of worship unto God. And so, if worship means telling and showing God how much we love him and appreciate him, then it has to be so much more than singing. Think of it like this. A girl would not think much of her boyfriend if he just rang her up once a week and sang her a song. She might enjoy the song, but if that was his only point of contact with her, then she wouldn't feel like the relationship mattered that much to him and wouldn't feel like she was very important in his life. And so in the same way, if we are turning up to church on a Sunday and just singing a couple of songs, then our relationship with God is going to struggle. It's not going to be the same. But actually, if we choose to give our everything, to do everything as an act of worship, then actually we grow closer to God. And so how does this look in our lives? How does this look in practice? Is worship visible in our lives? Do we give away the money we've been saving to help someone in need? Or do you go and sit beside someone who is alone in school or just ignore them? In our lives, we have so many opportunities to practice this discipline of worship, actually this discipline of choice. And sometimes it's really easy to worship. When life is going great and everything seems on track, it can be really easy to worship God. And it doesn't even seem like we have to choose to do it. But actually, when things are really tough, sometimes it's more difficult to worship God, and sometimes it might seem like it's really hard to do so. But actually, it's in those moments that we have to choose to worship. It's those moments, no matter how we feel, we need to worship God, because actually the things around us might change, but God never changes. And so we need to choose to worship him all the time, because he is always good. And so worship is not just for Sundays, it's for every day. And that is why we finished this series off with the discipline of worship, because actually everything that we do can be an act of worship unto God. And so I really encourage you this week to think about what it might look like for you to worship God in your everyday. What would it look like for you to worship God in school? What would it look like for you to worship God on a sports pitch? I really encourage you to spend time with God this week, to listen to some worship music, and to even write down some thoughts and ask God what it is that he's been teaching you over the past number of weeks through this series. Asking God what it is that he's been challenging you and putting on your heart for actually that you can create these rhythms in your life. Thank you so much for listening. You can head over to your groups now and we'll go through a few questions.